Hello everyone, today I'm continuing to share with you the story of Tieu, a single mother living a very ordinary life. Her story does not begin with great upheavals or dramatic moments, but is woven from quietly passing days, familiar routines, silent choices, and efforts that are rarely named or recognized. Tieu is a woman who has grown used to living slowly, to carrying responsibility on her shoulders without complaint. Her life revolves around her young daughter, the garden behind her house, and early morning market days that repeat as steadily as breathing. She does not seek attention, nor does she long for recognition. She simply moves through each day quietly, guided by perseverance and a deep sense of self-respect. And today, I want to continue telling that story, the story of Tieu, of the small yet steady steps of a single mother, of how she faces the first changes in her life with quiet resolve, gentle in appearance, but never weak. Tieu woke while the sky was still veiled in mist, when the world remained quiet, as if it had not yet gathered itself into a new day. The light outside was thin and pale, slipping through the leaves and settling over the backyard garden in a faint blue-gray wash. The air was cool and damp, carrying the familiar scent of soil, a smell that had stayed with her for so many years that a single breath of it was enough to make her feel at ease. The garden was still there, unchanged. Rows of vegetables lay neatly in place, leaves beaded with dew, resting beneath the early light as though waiting to be awakened. Tieu moved slowly between the beds, bending down to separate each bundle of greens from the earth. Her movements were steady and sure, requiring little thought. Her hands were long accustomed to soil and water, to small scratches that no longer troubled her. Each time she lifted a bundle, she gently shook off the excess dirt and set it aside neatly, following a habit that had sunk deep into her body. Everything unfolded calmly and familiarly, no different from any other morning before. The stillness was so complete that only the faint brushing of leaves against one another could be heard, along with the soft sound of her footsteps sinking into the damp ground. That very sense of routine slowed Tieu's thoughts, until she almost forgot Hai's promise from the night before, a promise that remained there, quiet and light, like a small, unnamed pause within the steady rhythm of her life. Before leaving the house, Tieu lingered for a long time in front of the mirror, standing so still that she nearly forgot time was passing. The room was still dim, the lamp casting a soft glow onto the glass, just enough to reflect the familiar face she had carried through so many years of hardship. She did not reach for any clothes, nor did she adjust her hair. She simply stood there, quietly looking straight at herself, as if forcing herself to face everything she had kept hidden for so long. In her eyes was an unmistakable worry, along with silent hesitations that had followed her through many days and nights. It was the gaze of someone accustomed to living cautiously, to drawing herself inward to avoid unnecessary disruptions. Yet deep inside, very faintly and delicately, something else still glimmered, a resolve not yet complete, not yet daring to be named, but enough to keep her eyes from sinking entirely as they once had. More than anyone, Tieu understood that this moment was more than just standing before a mirror. If today she did not move forward, did not grant herself even the smallest chance, then the days that followed would likely continue just as before. And over time, she would remain standing in that same familiar place, watching life pass by without ever quite stepping into it. Hai arrived to pick her up right on time, the car stopping in front of the gate in the familiar quiet. He stepped out, his expression calm, carrying neither questions nor haste. When he saw Tieu, Hai simply gave a slight nod, as if everything that needed to be said had been left for her to decide on her own. That sense of restraint and silence lightened the atmosphere in its own way, allowing her to get into the car without having to explain or reassure anything. Throughout the drive, Hai focused on the road, never breaking the stillness between them. Tieu sat by the window, her eyes following the unfamiliar stream of traffic passing by. The wide roads, the closely packed buildings, the unfamiliar faces flashing through her view made her feel as though she was leaving a familiar world behind and stepping into somewhere entirely different. Each passing image slowed her breathing, deeper and steadier, as if to keep her heart from wavering. Inside Tieu, emotions intertwined without pause. There was an excitement she could not quite name, a vague fear of the unknown, and a small, quiet sense of insignificance when she thought about her place in the world ahead. Everything felt unfamiliar and fragile, as though if she hesitated even slightly, she might lose the courage to keep going. Though the car continued to carry her forward at its steady pace, the glass doors of the company opened, separating Tieu from the familiar space outside and guiding her into a different world. Inside, everything appeared bright, spacious, and so meticulously ordered that she hesitated for a brief moment. White lights spread evenly across the room, reflecting off the spotless floor and the neatly arranged desks, creating a clear sense of structure and professionalism. The faint scent of new fabric lingered in the air, mingling with the steady hum of sewing machines running without pause. The sounds were not loud, yet they were enough to leave Tieu slightly unsettled, as if she were standing within a rhythm of life entirely different from the slow pace of her garden and the familiar early morning markets. She walked more slowly, her eyes drifting over every small corner, trying to take everything in even as the unfamiliarity continued to envelop her. Around her, well-groomed faces passed by in brief, efficient conversations. Laughter was measured, work-related exchanges crisp and concise, together forming an atmosphere that made Tieu instinctively draw inward. Within that space, she felt smaller than ever, like someone who had just stepped into a place that had never truly been hers, where everything felt distant and no clear place had yet been made for her. Hoai did not walk beside her. He stood off to one side, keeping a distance that felt just right, as though he was accustomed to stepping back to leave space for others to breathe on their own. His posture remained calm within the company's bright, open space. He did not step forward to lead the way, nor did he speak to prompt or introduce her. He chose to stay still, quietly observing, allowing Tieu to face what was unfolding before her by herself. From where he stood, Hoai's gaze followed her smallest movements, the brief pause before she took another step, the slow sweep of her eyes across the room, and the hesitation lingering in each careful stride. He showed no impatience, nor any intention to intervene. To him, this was not a moment for words or protection, but a time when she needed to walk on her own, even if only through these first few steps. The way Hoai looked at Tieu carried neither pressure nor overprotectiveness. There was no urging for her to move faster, no expectation that she should appear strong right away. There was only a quiet, unmistakable trust, and a patience deep enough to wait for her to find her own rhythm. He understood that if he stepped forward now, if he acted or spoke on her behalf, her silent efforts would become incomplete, lacking their full meaning. Tieu sensed this, even though Hoai did not say a single word. She realized that the silence behind her was not neglect, but a different way of being present. She knew this step was not for Hoai, nor was it meant to prove herself to anyone in that unfamiliar space. It was her own choice, a path she had agreed to enter, carrying with it all the worries, caution, and the faint, parallel hope quietly coexisting within her. And it was precisely that quiet presence behind her that helped her understand that every step she took now needed to be felt, balanced, and faced on her own terms. I am the office. Hoai spoke very slowly, each sentence laid down gently and clearly, as though he feared that even the slightest haste might cause her to retreat. His voice carried none of the familiar cadence of a director discussing work. There was no sharpness, no command. Instead, it was the low, steady voice of someone who had walked beside her through ordinary days, long enough to understand the years of hardship she had quietly borne on her shoulders. He did not look at the documents on the desk, nor did he glance around the room. Hoai's eyes rested directly on Tieu, not to apply pressure, but to let her feel the sincerity in every word. He spoke of mornings when she rose before dawn, of moments spent bending over dew-soaked vegetable beds, of long days that passed in silence without a single complaint. Each sentence came slowly, giving her time to understand, to believe, and to face herself. Hoai said that he did not want her to step into this place because of him, not out of affection, nor because of any arrangement on his part. He wanted her here because she deserved it, because everything she had been through entitled her to a fair opportunity. An opportunity to live with what she had once dreamed of, had studied for with seriousness, had carried quietly within her for many years without ever daring to reach for. These words were not spoken to persuade, nor to force an immediate decision. They were placed into the stillness of the room as a truth that needed to be acknowledged. And in that moment, Tieu understood that this was not merely a job offer, but a way for Hoai to return to her the right to believe that her dream had never been something too distant or too extravagant to claim just as she stepped into her first day of work. Before Tieu had time to fully take in the space around her, before she could even figure out where to sit or adjust the bag in her hands, a female employee walked straight toward her. The woman was impeccably dressed, from her crisply pressed outfit to her neatly styled hair, not a strand out of place. Her stride was quick and decisive, her eyes passing over Tieu with the familiarity of someone who had belonged to this place for a long time. Her voice rang out clear, fast, and sharp, carrying none of the tentative courtesy or small talk usually found in a first meeting. Everything was spoken as though roles had already been assigned, positions already set, and Tieu's only task was to comply. "You're new, right? Make copies of these for me." The words were delivered briskly, without waiting for a response. Before Tieu could fully grasp the situation, before she could even decide whether this was part of her responsibility, a thick stack of documents was placed directly into her hands. The neatly aligned pages were heavier than she expected, causing her arm to sink slightly by instinct. The sensation felt familiar, like carrying baskets of water-laden vegetables or heavy crates at the market. Only here, everything was cleaner and colder. Tieu stood still for a brief moment, as if giving her body time to adjust to this new pace. Her eyes skimmed over the pale pages, dense with printed lines she had not yet read. Around her, footsteps, conversations, and the hum of machines continued steadily, no one noticing her slight pause. In that moment, Tieu said nothing. She showed no outward sign of confusion, simply holding the stack of documents tightly in her arms. Yet deep inside, a faint sense of disorientation began to spread as she realized she was standing in a completely new environment, one where everything moved quickly, efficiently, and without waiting for anyone to find their footing. A foreign place, where she was still trying to discover a rhythm that fit her, even as everything around her refused to slow down for her. Just as she finished placing the stack of documents on the desk, before she had time to straighten up and pull her hands back, Tieu heard the woman's voice again from behind. It was the same quick, decisive tone, not loud, but sharp enough to make her turn around at once. "Make me a cup of coffee. Make sure it's the right strength." The words were delivered briskly, as an unquestioned demand, without explanation or a probing glance. Tieu gave a small, almost imperceptible nod out of reflex. She did not ask again, nor did she offer any clarification. Her body was accustomed to receiving instructions and carrying them out immediately, accustomed to placing herself in a lower position to avoid unnecessary friction. Inside Tieu, thoughts moved swiftly. She understood that she was new, without a place yet, without a voice in this environment. Tasks like this were probably unavoidable in the early days. She did not feel angry, nor did she feel clearly wronged, only a quiet, slightly heavy sensation in her chest, as she realized she was being seen in a way very different from what she had once hoped for. Tieu turned and walked toward the refreshment area, her step slow but steady. With each step, she reminded herself that this was simply part of beginning, that if she wanted to stay, she would have to learn how to move through moments like this without letting them make her falter. The errands continued one after another, unfolding steadily and quietly throughout the workday. Each time Tieu returned to her place, barely having time to sit down, another request followed, delivered in the same familiar tone, with the same brief, decisive manner, as if she were always available for tasks on the side. The repetition became so constant that Tieu no longer needed to anticipate it. She simply did the task and came back, moving within a closed loop. She soon realized that these requests were not made out of necessity. Around her, other employees remained at their desks, occupied with computer screens and clearly defined work conversations. No one appeared overwhelmed, and no one truly needed additional help. Yet the gaze of that woman lingered on Tieu longer than necessary, as though she were carefully observing every small reaction. This was no longer a matter of casual requests. In that gaze was a quiet scrutiny, a deliberate intention, as if testing how much Tieu would endure, how she would respond when placed in a lower position. Each time she called Tieu name, the woman left a very brief pause, just enough to assert who held control and who was expected to comply. Gradually, Tieu understood, not through words or formal introductions, but through the attitudes of those around her. The way other employees instinctively avoided that gaze, the way they fell silent while witnessing the succession of demands, all of it gave her a clear answer. That woman was not an ordinary employee. She was the department head, the one who held authority in this space, and also the one quietly placing Tieu into a test she had never chosen to take. Throughout the entire morning, Tieu did not voice a single complaint. She accepted every task assigned to her, whether large or small, and quietly moved from one duty to the next. Her pace was not fast, but it was steady and careful. She read each document thoroughly before making copies, neatly rearranged them once finished, brewed the coffee exactly as requested, and set it down properly, revealing no sign of discomfort or irritation on the surface. Around her, no one paid attention long enough to ask questions or take an interest. No one knew that she had studied design, that she had spent years devoted to sketches and fabrics. Nor did anyone realize that her presence here was not the result of chance or convenience, but of ability that had been seen and valued. In that space, her past was completely invisible, obscured by the role of a new hire quietly doing her work. Tieu did not take the initiative to explain herself, nor did she try to draw attention. She understood that words at this moment would not change how others perceived her. The only thing she could do was to complete what lay before her well, maintaining a calm and steady demeanor amid unfamiliar gazes. Inside her, the thought was simple and clear. She had come here to work, to relearn the rhythm of a new environment, not to prove herself to anyone. She believed that the time would come when the real work truly began, and the things that belonged to her abilities would speak for themselves, without her needing to say a word or offer any justification. From inside his office, Hai saw everything. Through the transparent glass, he observed the space outside with the familiar silence of someone accustomed to a position where one must watch more than speak. He saw Tieu moving slowly between desks, saw her being given more tasks, saw the way she quietly turned and walked away without revealing any reaction on the surface. Everything unfolded clearly before his eyes, needing no further explanation. Hai did not intervene right away. Not because he failed to recognize what was happening, but because he wanted to see how Tieu would choose to face it. He had known her long enough to understand that she was not as fragile as she appeared, yet he had never placed her in a situation like this before. This was the first time he allowed her to stand alone in such an environment, and he needed to see how she would hold herself when no one stepped forward to protect her. At the same time, Hai also wanted to know who was crossing the line. Not through complaints or secondhand reports, but through the repeated actions unfolding right before him. He watched carefully the woman's gaze, the way she called Tieu, the manner in which requests were issued one after another, deliberately aimed at a single person. To Hai, everything was already clear, he simply had not yet given it a name. When Tieu bent down to place the cup of coffee on the desk, Hai saw her hands tremble slightly. It was not clumsiness, but the reflex of someone trying to remain composed in a space that was not meant for her. Her eyes, however, were different. Still calm, neither evasive nor defiant, neither pleading nor resistant. Just a quiet gaze, holding herself together amid quiet unfairness. It was in that moment that Hai stood up. Hai called the department head into his private office immediately afterward. There was no commotion, no public reprimand outside, just a brief, direct remark, clear enough for the person being summoned to understand that this was not a courtesy invitation. The woman stood up, adjusted her familiar posture, and followed him, her expression still composed as her eyes passed over the room. The office door closed behind them, completely separating the interior from the ongoing rhythm outside. The hum of sewing machines faded away, as did the scattered conversations. In the quiet of that room, Hai stood facing the department head. He did not sit down right away, nor did he circle around the issue with small talk. The conversation did not last long. Hai did not need much time to ask his question. He spoke directly, his voice low and clear, carrying no personal emotion, only a necessary confirmation. Do you know what position Tieu was hired for? The question was delivered plainly, without explanation or hints. The woman stood still for a few seconds, her gaze wavering briefly before settling. She remained silent. That silence was not because she failed to understand the question, but because she could not answer it convincingly. Hai did not press her. He allowed the pause to exist just long enough to mark a clear boundary between what was right and what had been crossed. Then he continued, his voice still calm and familiar, yet each word firm, leaving no space for evasion. This company does not accept the use of personal authority to belittle others. He did not raise his voice, nor did he need to emphasize further. The sentence was laid down like an established principle, not something to be debated, but something to be obeyed. That afternoon, a brief announcement was issued. There was no full staff meeting, no public discussion, no prolonged curious glances. It was simply a decision released through the proper process, at the proper time, in the way this company had always operated. The department head's contract was terminated with immediate effect. Everything unfolded quietly. There were no arguments, no lengthy explanations offered to the staff. Her desk was quickly cleared, personal belongings removed in silence. The surrounding space returned to its familiar working rhythm, as though a gap had appeared, one that no one was meant to pause to name. The atmosphere in the company was neither unsettled nor heavy. The silence did not come from indifference, but from an understanding that this decision was not driven by momentary emotion. It was decisive and clear, requiring no justification. Here, every position is tied to responsibility, and every boundary has long been set. This company values capability, demonstrated through one's work, through the way others are treated, and through one's conduct when holding authority. Arrogance, no matter how carefully disguised, has no place within that space. Tieu only learned of it when she happened to glance toward the familiar desk of that woman and realized it was empty. The chair had been neatly pushed in, the tabletop cleared, no longer holding the orderly stacks of files, or the coffee cup set slightly off to one side as it had been that morning. The emptiness appeared quietly, without warning, yet clearly enough to make her pause for a brief moment. No one told her the reason. There was no explanation, no glance directed her way to hint at anything. Everyone continued with their work, the afternoon rhythm moving along steadily as if nothing significant had changed. Tieu did not ask. She simply noted what she saw, then returned to the unfinished tasks on her desk. Hai did not mention it either. He did not seek her out to explain, nor did he say a word about the morning or what had happened. When he passed by Tieu's seat, he stopped only briefly, leaning slightly toward her, his voice lowered just enough so no one else could hear. This afternoon, try sitting in the design room. The words were spoken gently, without explanation or emphasis. Like a simple suggestion, yet clear enough for Tieu to understand that from this moment on, she would begin doing the work she had come here to do. Tieu sat at the drawing desk, her back straight yet still slightly stiff, like someone not fully accustomed to the new position. In front of her, a sheet of white paper lay perfectly flat, without a single crease or mark, opening into a quiet space waiting to be filled. The desk lamp cast just enough light, highlighting the surface of the paper and the drawing tools neatly arranged beside it. Her hand still trembled lightly as she rested it on the edge of the table. The sensation was real, but it was no longer the vague fear she had felt that morning. It was the trembling of someone standing before something she had waited for far too long, of someone who had once believed that this dream had been left behind with the years spent struggling to make a living. She paused for a moment, took a deep breath, letting her breathing slow and her thoughts settle. Tieu reached for the pencil. The movement was so familiar it felt almost instinctive, even though a long stretch of time had passed since she last used it in this way. As the tip of the pencil gently touched the paper, the sounds around her seemed to fall away. In that moment, there were no scrutinizing glances, no small, peripheral tasks. For the first time since stepping into the company, Tieu was doing the work that was truly hers. Not to prove herself, not to answer to anyone, but simply to return to what she had once studied, once loved, and once believed she could do well. Quietly and wholeheartedly, He stood at a distance, watching her from a spot that drew no attention. Close enough to see clearly, yet far enough not to distract her. He did not walk over, nor did he give any sign that might make Tieu aware of his gaze. He simply observed in silence, as he had grown used to standing behind her choices, allowing her to walk her path in full, on her own. He saw the way Tieu leaned over the drawing desk, saw focus gradually settle across her face as her hand relearned the rhythm of the pencil. The hesitation of the morning was gone, as was the sense of being lost among unfamiliar glances. What remained was simply a person working, truly working, in quiet concentration and seriousness. For Hoai, that was enough to put his mind at ease. He did not need Tieu to know what he had done behind closed doors, nor did he need her to understand why things had changed so quickly. He had never wanted his presence to become a shelter that deprived her of the feeling of standing on her own. What needed to be resolved, he had resolved. The boundaries that needed to be set, he had set not to protect her in any showy way, but to return to her an environment of basic fairness. As long as Tieu could work in a decent environment, one where people are judged by their ability, where respect is not a privilege, that was enough. For Hoai, standing at a distance and watching her calmly place each line onto the blank page was the way he chose to be there, quietly and without needing to be seen.
Xin chào mọi người đã quay trở lại với kênh của mình. Hôm nay thì mình tiếp tục đưa đến video tiếp theo nha mọi người. Hiện tại thì mình đang trong quá trình làm nội dung và edit video. Một tí nữa hoàn thành xong thì mình sẽ đăng lên sớm nhất có thể. Mọi người hãy ủng hộ cho kênh của mình nhé. Cảm ơn mọi người, hẹn gặp lại mọi người trong những video sau.